there's always light at the end of the tunnel. There's always some kind of bright future in the dark present, right? So what happens once the Middle Ages and Renaissance begin? And Renaissance means rebirth, enlightenment. In the 1400s, first in Europe started Renaissance. And this era was different from pro-Renaissance in a way that it was more realistic, the colors were more vibrant, and you see more frescoes, which I will talk in a second. Before that though, I want to mention one thing. What happened? Why Renaissance began in the first place? Thanks to Gutenberg. By 1440, Gutenberg established the basics of his printing press, including the use of a mobile, reusable set of type, and within 10 years, he had constructed a working prototype of the press. And this, ladies and gentlemen, caused a whole chain of events. Now, people were reading more, people were doing research more, they were writing more, and learning helped this Enlightenment period a lot. Two important things in this era happened. One, in 1453, Fatih Sultan Mehmed conquered Constantinople and made it Istanbul. And this was the start of a whole era. And the second important event is in 1492, Christopher Columbus found the America land. So what does this mean? Again, this is the chain of an event. If you read more, you get curious more, and you want to travel more, explore more, and when you come back, you tell more people. 1500s are High Renaissance. Well, High Renaissance is the peak of the Renaissance era, and you find most famous people that we know in the art history during this era. For example, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Raphael, and Bramante. If you're thinking about Sandro Botticelli, it's mostly in the beginning of Renaissance, and then you see the peak of the Renaissance later in 1500s. During these times, I want to mention 2 or 3 artworks that are important. For example, Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa is important for so many reasons, but I think for me, the most important reason is where you see Da Vinci's sfumato method most clearly. If you look at the background where the trees are meeting the sky, and if you look at the scarf around her hair, you can see that between the hair and the scarf, or even her skin, you can see this sfumato method. Sfumato method is a technique that Da Vinci introduced to us, as if that border is kind of evaporating. It's so smooth. When you have the transition, you cannot even tell exactly where it ends and where it starts. The other one I want to talk about is Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling paintings, and their frescoes. I was lucky enough last year to go and see this chapel in person. It was amazing. It was breathtaking. It was really tall, very high ceiling, and I couldn't even imagine how long it took him per day to work on that on his back, because in order to paint that, you need to literally kind of lay on your back and work on it like this vertically. It's so painful. I cannot even do it more than 10 minutes. And thinking about it, how skillful he was, it just gives me chills. I know Americans call him Michelangelo, but in Italy, I realized everybody was saying Michelangelo, so I go with that. If you want to learn more about his personality, his artworks and career, you should check this out. He was also a great sculptor, as you know. He made infamous David and Pieta. I saw both of them again in person, and I couldn't believe when he sculpted Pieta, he was only 24 years old. It's just unbelievable. And during those times, Raphael was also at his peak in his career, and he died, unfortunately, very, very early when he was only 27. But he was very good at teaching what he knew, and this was how he was very well known in the palace. If you go to Vatican City, you will see these three masters' works: Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and Raphael. I highly recommend it. If I had a time machine, if I could go back in time, I think I would go back in a time where there were three of them, walking the same path, and I was there like watching them passing by and not liking each other and stuff like that. It would be really fun. Do you remember I told you how little Jesus was looking like an adult, not like a baby? And in Renaissance, what we see as a different from Proto-Renaissance is that now Jesus Christ's face is looking like a baby and acting like a baby as well. So with Mother Mary, let's say he's touching maybe her arm, or mother shows affection. You can see this mother and child relationship more in Renaissance paintings. Compositions that are including the palette of red, blue, and green. You also see nature behind the portraits, and a lot of portraits, religious figures from Bible or Medici family or the other royal members. This is what you see in Renaissance paintings. Speaking of Medici, I should mention this. I think Italians were very lucky to have this emperor at that time, because Medici Empire actually helped and supported artists tremendously. And I think this also caused a lot of good things in Italian Renaissance. Between Baroque times and the Renaissance times, there was only a 60-year period of Mannerism. And how you recognize Mannerism is usually you see people's body parts, like maybe necks or torso, or the limbs are maybe longer than it should be. This is how you can kind of pinpoint Mannerism. Between 1600 and 1750, we have Italian Baroque times. It started in Italians and the Dutch at the same time, around the same time. And with the Italian Baroque times, what you see is now the palette is getting darker, right? Like the colors are like shades of brown, gray, and even black. And then you see like common people, ordinary people of life, not just royal people. And when you look at the faces of these figures, you can see the light is onto their faces in the paintings rather than somewhere else. And another form of Baroque painting is they are very, let's say, festive, like a lot of things going on in the same painting. You can see, let me show you an example. You can see that the figures are moving or in the middle of some moves. There are so many colors, there are so many figures, there's so many things going on at the same time. So if you have either this kind of paintings or these kind of paintings, these are very distinctive elements, let's say, of the Baroque times. I can give you an example from this period as Velázquez, Bernini, or Rubens. I think again, after that high Renaissance, they got into this 30-year war of Catholic and Protestant war, and this affected people. They again found themselves in poverty, and they were worried about how the war is going to end, how many people will die. So these are again dark periods. I don't know if you noticed, a pattern here. There's like dark times, bright times, dark times, bright times, and I think this is marking the dark times. From Dutch Baroque, Johannes Vermeer. Hopefully I will visit Netherlands this year and I will get to see his work in depth. I really love him. If you cannot tell, you can tell from here. There's dark background and you can see the light source is right on the left somewhere, shining onto her face. So this is a typical Baroque portrait. Towards the end of this time, for a very short time, we have another art movement called Rococo. And this came out in France. In this era, you see buildings that are tall and they are ornamented with like frill-like structures, like ruffles, you know, very flamboyant. Between 1750 to 1850, we have Neoclassic era. So in this Neoclassic era, something very important happened. Now in Neoclassic time, the portraits or the figures were becoming more like those that are in Greek times and Roman times. Portraits were getting more and more important. And why? Because individualism started. And why, you wonder? Because steam engine was invented. Well, with steam engine, industrial revolution happened. As you know, people were traveling fast, so merchants were able to sell their products in 3 or 4 different cities in one day. So that grew economy so much that it came to a point all this machinery was making everything look very magical, and economy was getting much better, and people felt unbeatable, unbreakable. They were like gods. So I think I want to say this. I talked to you about the hunting period in art. I talked about theism part, and now I'm coming to the individualism part. Now instead of God, now we are coming back to humans again. So with the Industrial Revolution, of course, there were so many changes. There were so many buildings built and cities were rebuilt again, so many systems, so many machines. So what happened that we got very taken away from the nature. As a result, the rebellious art started another movement called Romanticism. Between 1780 and 1850, you see this art movement. And what happens is that you see nature, and in the middle of the nature somewhere, you see human figures. But here, it is mostly the feeling that the painting gives you and that nature gives you, more than the figure itself. In this era, again, one more important thing happened, which is French Revolution. After French Revolution, now humans were completely unstoppable. Because now people were more interested in freedom. I told you that, after Industrial Revolution and French Revolution, human beings started to look more inside. They started to think like, I am at the center of the world. And maybe the world is revolving around me, I don't know. So with this feeling, a new art movement emerged. Not really new, actually. Renaissance is kind of that way, but realism. Between 1848 and 1900, many Jean-François Millet paintings and also Gustave Courbet paintings are good examples of this era. In 1850, something very interesting happens. Photography emerges. Well, bad news for realist paintings, because now people can just have their photos taken instead of going to an artist and like, hey, make me a portrait of mine, please, and stuff like that. So photography changed the game, let me say this way. And in art, as an artistic form, photography revolutionized a lot of things. In 1900, we see a new movement, Art Nouveau. in here we see lots of flowers, geometric shapes. It is again kind of a part of Romanticism, but not really. So it's a nice way of having a break from realism. (1865) Impressionism. Well, what happened? Like after photography, people are bored of realism, I guess. Let's show the world without realism, art still exists. We can do different things. We can be better than that. And now we have Claude Monet, Pissarro, Paul Cézanne, and all these artists are doing their masterpieces with Impressionism. You see more prominent brushstrokes, and also the use of colors is more different than what people used in realism. Between 1885 and 1910, we have post-impressionism. With post-impressionism, we have longer and more prominent brushstrokes, and also we have again wonderful painters. Vincent van Gogh is one of them. Between 1900 and 1935, we have Fauvism and Expressionism. Something again very important happened between these years, and this was, I would say, inevitable, because when people start to think that they are so strong, they're so powerful, they're like gods, they always fall on their faces, and this is what happened between these years. The First World War was between 1914 and 1918, and it definitely affected art as well as it affected a lot of other things. Guys, did you know that after the First World War, because lots of women lost their husbands, now they were alone with their kids and they had to take care of the families, so they needed to work at jobs that were only men used to work around that time. So what happened that women not only took their own mother role, but also father role and husband role. So that was very difficult times. And Coco Chanel designed very first trousers for my British speakers here, for women. And this was a huge change, because that also symbolized those days that they had to become more masculine in order to survive. So fashion is a part of art, but what about the other part of art? In Fauvism, what we see is mostly very bright, very, I would say, dominant colors, and also very flat surfaces. Henri Matisse is a good example of this art movement. When you look at his paintings, you see the colors and you would feel something, awaken some kind of emotion in you, and that's also a part of Expressionism. Expressionism means that the art piece gives you a feeling that you don't necessarily look at the object, look at the figures or background and understand a meaning from it. Instead, what matters is some kind of feeling is given to the observer. In 1905, we see Cubism. In Cubism, you deconstruct a form. After you deconstruct it, after you put in the pieces, you try to put them together in different order. I mean, it's of course a very basic explanation of it, but it's a different art movement, it's a different style. And I always thought that, with the World War and everything was kind of burnt down, everything was destroyed, and we were picking up the pieces and trying to put them back together, but not as same as before, making it different. And Pablo Picasso is one of the most famous painters of this era, as well as, of course, the other artists. Between 1917 and 1950, we have surrealism, which means these crazy compositions. It's like a scene from your dream, right? Like, or nightmare, it depends on the whole format. But it doesn't necessarily realistic. There are so many figures, and maybe even it's abstract, you don't know. And one of the most famous painters of this era, again, Salvador Dali, Frida Kahlo, or Ernst. During these years, not only we had the Second World War, we had Hitler, we had Nazis, like horror and terror of those times. In addition to that, we had Great Depression, many deaths again, poverty, again dark times. And these times, I think people felt like, I want to run away from reality because reality hurts. Let me go to my mind and create the craziest world for me so that I can find a space to live in and survive. Between 1940 and 1950, we see abstract expressionism. And one of the best examples of this is Jackson Pollock, of course. And 1960s, pop art began. And with this art movement, of course, 1960s, 1970s, as you know, again, rebellious times, lots of politics situations going on. But you know, we have hippies, and you know, there are lots of flowers, many colors, and even the fashion gets really, really colorful. And here we see this color in art as well, with pop art. Andy Warhol is one of the biggest artists of this era, as well as Yayoi Kusama. Let's look at what happens in 1960s and afterwards. Well, Soviet Union collapses in 1990, and then we have Berlin Wall, which collapsed again. So many borders are collapsing. What does this mean? We are getting more free. Vietnam War finished, Second World War finished. So what we are having here is mostly freedom. Let's be free. And that created the postmodernism era after 1970s. And since then, we are still in the same art movement, I would say. Yes, we have digital art. Yes, we have, you know, hyperrealism at its peak right now. But we are still in modern art era. I don't know how long it's going to last, but now that people are more free about their choices, and this is affecting our art. With postmodernism, sometimes you tape a banana on the wall and that's art. Sometimes you have blank canvas, it's art. Sometimes you make this abstract piece with oil paint, it's art. Or a Renaissance like fine art portrait, it's still modern art because we are set free. I mean, we can do whatever we want to, and freedom is the focus of whole topic here. So we are celebrating variety and freedom, and there is no rebellion per se. Modern art is more attentive, includes more people in the art than other art movements, and also we can, I think, say that modern art still has figures at its center. We use a lot of figures now, but again, there is no definitive structure because it celebrates the variety and freedom. I hope you enjoyed this very quick tour of the whole art's history. I know it didn't include every detail, but it could be a good quick guide for you if you want to come and refer to this video for any of the art history questions you had. If you haven't watched my Artist Spotlight series, I highly recommend it because it's one of the most popular series of my channel. I'm putting it right here for you. If you have time, don't miss it. I'll see you in my next video. Till then, take care.